Just wait for people to join us here. Great, we're 1 minute after. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the, to the January meeting of the MineWatch community. My name is Stephanie, and I am a volunteer with Community Environmental Advocates Foundation. And thank you very much for joining. And I will be turning it over to Greg from the Sierra Fund.
Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you all could attend this evening. There's quite a few of us on tonight. And tonight is an especially important meeting because, as most of you probably know, Nevada County released the draft environmental impact report for the Idaho-Maryland Mine application on January 4th. Go ahead, you can put the word cloud up, Stephanie. The Board of Supervisors has a big decision to make. It's a decision that will take into account a huge number of factors, including community values, risk-reward analysis, the applicant's suitability for the project, and compliance oversight. And in order to clarify some of the biggest questions, the county has commissioned 2 reports, the environmental impact report and a separate economic impact report. The economic report will come later in the process, and today, all eyes are on the draft environmental impact report, or DEIR. And I expect that many of you are here because you want to know more about the DEIR and how to participate in the public comment process. So that's what we're going to do tonight. Again, welcome. CEA is a local community group that advocates for responsible land use and environmental protection policies and actions in Nevada County. And all of the meetings that they hold and lots of other things, but specifically these meetings, are recorded and can be found on the MineWatchNC.org website. If you're there under the library menu, you go to the videos tab and you'll find a list of available meetings on various topics related to the mine. CEA has created many valuable materials and articles about the proposed mine reopening for people to use for us. And MineWatchNC.org is a great resource for fighting the mine reopening. And so please take advantage of it and let your friends know and family about it. And we could put a link in the QA or in the QA section, but basically it's MineWatchNC.org. And as I said, tonight's video is going to focus on the Idaho-Maryland Mine Draft Environmental Impact Report. The objective tonight is to give people a more in-depth understanding of the process and some high-level views on the report and ideas and guidance for our community to participate in the public comment process. And so we're going to get started. But before we do launch into the presentations, let me introduce our panelists. Martin Webb is with us this evening. He's a local resident who hosts the Energy Report Climate Report on KVMR radio. He's also a community member, a longtime community member, and a fairly articulate person. Paul Schwartz is a retired capital planner. He's a CEA volunteer and a longtime Nevada County resident. Ralph Silberstein is the president of CEA Foundation, and he is always here and always available to answer questions about the process. He's just a major force in thinking about this project. Tonight we have somebody new who I don't think has been on as a panelist before. Her name is Jillian Blanchard. She's a community member and a permitting, CEQA, and land use attorney. She does not represent the CEA Foundation and can't provide legal advice, but she has agreed to help answer general questions about the CEQA, land use, and permitting processes. We have Stephanie on, who you saw at the very beginning. Stephanie is a community member running the webinar tonight. When she's not volunteering for CEA, she organizes web meetings for a living. And so we're really lucky to have her do this for us. Next, we have Christy Hubbard. Christy is a CEA volunteer, long time, and also a very talented content developer. She's done a lot of the MineWatchNC.org website, and we are so lucky to have her. She is also a neighbor of the Idaho-Maryland Mine. And so she thinks about this very carefully because it will impact her and all of the people in that area quite dramatically. We also have Tracy Sheehan. Tracy is working with CEA to do outreach on the Idaho-Maryland Mine. And she is going to be presenting tonight as well, a couple of times. And my name is Greg Thrush. I'm a community organizer for the Sierra Fund and also a CEA volunteer. The Sierra Fund works on issues related to mining legacy in the Sierra Nevada. And so I live in downtown Grass Valley, and I'm going to facilitate the meeting tonight. I guess that's what I'm doing, huh? Okay, so before we begin, let's go over what's happening tonight and how everyone can participate. We got feedback from folks that not all questions were being answered in prior meetings, and so we think we figured out how to remedy this. So like usual, please use the QA feature to submit questions and comments during or after the presentations are done. And then we will also be having a live open forum at the end. So if you would like to hold your questions till then, you can. But really, we're gonna, a good forum is to kind of put the questions in because they're well formulated, and then we can kind of direct them at the panelists. So first, the order of things is first Martin will give us a quick primer on the numbers from the recently released DEIR. Next, Paul is going to explain the DEIR, what it does and doesn't do, how it works in order to help her, and how it works basically. And this is in order to help our community use this public comment period to our best advantage. And then following Paul, Ralph will provide an overview of a few of the significant issues that CEA has surfaced thus far in reviewing the DEIR. And then Tracy is going to lead us through and talk to us about how to submit a good comment letter about the DEIR. And then after Tracy presents, we'll start the Q&A and comment section, and all of the questions that you put into the QA, we will direct to the panelists. And then Tracy will take it back again and talk to us about other ways that we can take action as community members to help stop the mine. And then finally, we'll have some time at the end for a community conversation. And so anyone who wants to make a verbal comment or ask a question live may do so then. And in order to do that, just indicate that you would like to speak by using the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen, and we'll acknowledge you and unmute you, and then you can take the floor. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce Martin Webb. Martin needs very little introduction. Most of us have listened to his radio show on KVMR and found it thought-provoking. Martin is not a CEA volunteer, but has been invited a couple of times now to participate in these public meetings that CEA offers, because he is a great representation of our community and also a very smart guy. And I've heard that he had an article published in the Union today, which is worth a read. I haven't read it myself, but here we go. So Martin, if you're ready, go ahead, it's yours.
I am. Thanks for the kind introduction, Greg. I didn't realize the Union published my piece today, so I look forward to the angry comments below it. Yeah, so my name is Martin Webb. I've lived here in Nevada County in Penn Valley for going on 24 years now, and my expertise has been in energy and solar all this time. And that's what brought me into working with MineWatch and CEA on opposing this project when I was asked last August to be a speaker on the energy use at the mine. And at that time, I was just sort of like, tangentially opposed to it. But once I dove into the numbers, I was appalled at just how bad it looked and just how easy of a target this proposal would be if we just made sure that we understood, the language they're using and what we need to use. And as a solar person, most of my training is sales. And so this feels like a big sales pitch from Rise Gold, and I'm happy to rise to the occasion for the community. So next slide, and what I'd like to do is just run through the numbers as I quickly saw them, because I kind of like to nerd out on government reports like this, especially when so much is at stake. So I want to share with you some numbers. We're going to start big and get small. The report itself is over 1,000 pages, research, analysis, summaries. There are so many acronyms associated with this project. There are 10 pages alone of acronyms and their definitions. That report was populated by not just the standards that the state requires for CEQA and an environmental impact report, but there was also a 30-day period in the summer of 2020 where all of the individuals, agencies, groups, organizations had a chance to give our own community input on what we wanted to make sure they looked at as potential negative adverse impacts to our community. So we helped drive this EIR, and it really validated our concerns. Next slide. Because what we discovered is that when they distilled those 750 comments down, we were part of 85 different local concerns listed in this draft EIR. Now, only 2 of those were designated no impact. There is an opportunity, this is really huge with this draft EIR, there's an opportunity for all of these impacts to be rated as no impact. Actually, we were wrong. Or do they have an impact or not? And in reality, only 2 were dismissed as having really no impact. The other 83 were deemed true and legitimate. Next slide. Now, out of these 83 negative impacts on our community, they're grouped into 25 different areas of concern. And for the purpose of putting together all this info and report, they have to be grouped into these 13 categories. So there are 83 different negative impacts to our small, precious rural community across all of these different diverse ways of our lives being impacted. And who in the right mind would want to negatively impact a small rural community in so many ways all at once? You'd have to not live here in order to be satisfied with what this document shows. Next slide. Now, what's interesting is after they corroborated and validated 83 different impacts, they have to separate them into whether they're considered significant enough for forced mitigation or not. So this is how it got broken down. Out of 83 impacts, 32 are significant enough to need mitigation. 51 were deemed less than significant. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't exist or they suddenly turn into flowers and unicorns. They are still there. And those 51 less than significant impacts affect every facet of life here all at the same time. Natural character, air, water quality, everything that we hold true to why we live here. So to call those 51 less than significant impacts as just disappeared and taken care of as Rise Gold is trying to in their pitch of this draft EIR, it's just not true. And this is why, for me, it's going to be very important when I communicate to the Board of Supervisors when the decision comes. No one that lives here in their right mind could claim that 51 negative adverse impacts added together doesn't equal one very significant impact. Next slide. Now, as part of all of these negative impacts, they also are asking to use the property in a way that it's not currently intended to. Recently, the union's editorial board framed the proposed mine as being a perfectly legal use of the property, yet this DEIR confirmed that it would ignore existing building height limits. The Board of Supervisors would have to allow buildings beyond 16 stories tall in our woods, where currently they're limited to 45 feet. They would allow them to potentially develop slopes that are 30% grade. They would have to ignore setbacks that we, our own county, has come up with to protect Wolf Creek and our water courses. But what's worse is not only would there be 83 adverse impacts, and not only would they have to bend all of these rules that protect our community, but this would open up this use permit for 80 years, meaning that so what if Rise Gold doesn't follow through and ends up folding their cards within a few years if they got this permit? They could sell those rights to damage our community for 80 years. So when you think of what Rise Gold is trying to say, they're generally saying that, hey, there's only 2 impacts. We've only discovered there's 2 impacts to the community. And what they're trying to claim is that these 83 impacts have mostly gone away, and that magically all of the mitigation is guaranteed to take place and take care of all of these issues, and suddenly it's going to be a rosy community. The truth is, only 2 impacts were disappeared, 83 still stay. Next slide. So what do we get in return? Because they're claiming, yeah, we are going to damage your community. We're sorry about that. But guess what? Tons of jobs and money. It's just going to float down from the sky. Well, when I looked at the economic reports last summer, it was very clear that Rise Gold continually relies on one specific study for job creation and their multipliers of economic impact. And what's fascinating is if you click the links in the footnotes on Rise Gold's own website and own studies, you can look at that report to discover, out of all of the industries available in America today that we could take advantage of in our community for jobs, mining is perpetually at the bottom or next to the bottom. Mining creates the fewest jobs per dollar of economic value. It creates fewer jobs downstream of a project, which means in the local community, as opposed to upstream with financiers and marketers. So with mining, we'd essentially get the worst amount of jobs possible in exchange for 83 definitive negative impacts for possibly 80 years. So any other industry is really far better. If we really needed jobs, this would be the worst one we'd choose. It's like looking at a classroom full of 179 students and deciding we're going to pick the lowest one in order to dance with for the next 80 years. So remember, Rise Gold is going to be claiming there's only 2 impacts and lots of jobs, but it's very clear that there are 83 impacts that are not going anywhere, and they would provide fewer jobs than any other industry we could possibly want. So I just want to thank you for having me back and allowing me to present some of these facts, because it's going to be our story versus their story. And the Board of Supervisors live here, and they absolutely need to make sure they know there will be 83 impacts to our community. And when I plan to speak, I'm actually planning to count from 1 to 83 as fast as I can to demonstrate that is a significant impact on our little community. That's all I have. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Martin. Hey, I'm not sure, I might have misunderstood somebody's text. Did you submit an article to the union recently, or is this an article that from the past?
I submitted an article this week that's not related to the mine. It was related to the fire threat and the recent problems with energy and power outages. So it wasn't related to the mine, but I think that's what people are referring to.
Okay, I'm sorry, I haven't read the article, and so I presumed it was about the mine, but I think it will be worth read. Okay, great. Thank you again, Martin. So next, we have Paul Schwartz. Paul is a very dear person and a volunteer for CEA who's done a lot of work thinking through the implications of this application process. And he brings with him basically a lifetime professional experience about planning processes. And so Paul has been kind enough to put together what we call a DEIR Explainer, which will kind of go through the process. It's a bit dry, but it's super important, just so that we can understand exactly how this whole thing is going to play out. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. A DER is a draft environmental impact report, and I will briefly talk about what the DER does and what it doesn't do. You can read it at the MineNevadaCounty.com website. As Martin said, it's really long, but there is a good summary at the beginning, and there is a good table of all of the different negative issues and mitigations at the end. Next. So the DER is rooted in scientific analysis completed by experts. The California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, analysis is required by law to disclose all potentially significant environmental impacts to the public. The intent is to give the public and community the information and tools to make informed decisions. The county is required to analyze and mitigate environmental impacts before approving a project. The county is required, when you read the DEIR, I suggest you start with the executive summary and then go to the table of impacts and mitigations. From there, you can identify the things that that catch your eye and that you're interested in, that you think you need more study on, and you can go back into the document and read all the science and the analysis and the details. Next. The DER does not mandate a certain result. The CEQA process provides decision makers such as the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors with the information they will need to ultimately approve, amend, or reject the proposed project. Next. The CEQA process allows the decision makers to require the project to implement changes that will lessen or avoid significant impacts. They can also adopt a finding of overriding considerations if they determine the project benefits outweigh the environmental impacts that can't be mitigated. The overriding considerations, California Code 15093, and I'm going to read just a couple short excerpts from it. CEQA requires the decision-making agency to balance the economic, legal, social, technological, or other benefits of a proposed project against its unavoidable environmental risks when determining whether to approve the project. If these outweigh the unavoidable adverse environmental effects, the adverse environmental effects may be considered acceptable. When the lead agency approves a project which will result in the occurrence of significant effects identified in the final EIR, but are not avoided or substantially lessened, the agency shall state in writing the specific reasons to support its action based on the final EIR and the information of record. The statement of overriding considerations shall be supported by substantial evidence in the record. I think this is really important because ultimately, if the environmental impact, if the project's approved, if they say that we're going to adopt the overriding considerations for those things that can't be mitigated, and if the information is incorrect, then people need to speak up. County staff will review the public comments and determine whether the DEIR needs to be revised or whether comments can be responded to as part of the final EIR. If the public identifies any new significant impacts or new information that should have been included in the draft EIR, the county may need to revise the DEIR to address these new impacts and recirculate it for public review. Next. So there's the language. There's the language on overriding considerations. Give you a chance to look through them. There are a couple of things right now that can't be mitigated. So we know that this is going to come. This is going to be something that comes into play as a tool for the County Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. Next. The Planning Commission will decide whether to certify the final EIR analysis as adequate once the response to comments document has been prepared and staff puts forward a final EIR. We do not anticipate this coming out until later this year. Because there are defined negative impacts in the report that can't be mitigated, the county would need to adopt a statement of overriding considerations in order to approve the project. Approving and certifying the DEIR analysis is complete would lead to a final EIR, which would include the response to all of the public comments received. Next. So keep in mind that mitigation measures must be clear, feasible, and achievable. If the county relies on a future plan or a future action, then the mitigation measure must identify clear performance standards. The pyramid illustrates what a mitigation measure is supposed to do. Next. When reviewing the summary table of impacts and mitigations in the DEIR, ask yourself if the analysis makes sense. If it doesn't make sense or is confusing, refer back into the document for complete analysis. If the negative impact still looks like it's a problem, this would be something to note and include in your letter to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. Next. There are local and state agencies, nonprofits, volunteers, and paid legal and technical experts reviewing the DEIR and identifying data and analysis gaps and misleading conclusions. Your voice is critical in this process. If you identify a potentially significant impact in your comment letter that the county failed to identify in the DEIR, then the county may be required to analyze the issue and recirculate the DEIR again. Next. So get involved, write letters, talk to your friends and family, attend public hearings. You can learn more at the MineWatchNC.org website. The DER is currently in the 60-day public review phase, where local and state agencies, nonprofits, and the public provide the Planning Commission, the Board of Supervisors with comments, opinions, and analysis on the adequacy of the DER. The more specific you are in referring to DER content in your letter, the better. The final date to submit comments to the county is March 4th, 2022. Next. The first public hearing is, as you can see here, is with the Planning Commission on February 23rd, 9:30 a.m. at the Root Center. Pay attention, look for their agenda. The more people that show up, the better. My understanding is for comments to actually end up on the record, you need to submit them in writing. So I would recommend writing to the Planning Commission, the Board of Supervisors first, and then making your public comments at the meeting. Next. CEA will offer a webinar workshop or an in-person workshop. We're still figuring it out, to share DER analysis and best practices for writing comment letters. Hopefully that will be in February sometime. We'll keep you informed. Next. The Centennial Site Remediation Action Plan is currently being finalized by the California Department of Toxic Substances Control. And there are a number of other state and federal permits this project will require before they can start construction. And we will continue to keep informed on opportunities for you to get involved. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. There is a question that I am supposed to address right now. Let me read it. I'm not quite sure. Can someone handle that question? I don't think I can answer it.
It's 10 reports, Greg.
Yes, it is 10 reports.
Yeah, so it's a series of reports, and they can all be read and seen on the county website.
Okay, thank you. So next, we have Ralph Superstein, and Ralph has really coordinated a lot of the research and investigation, or looking deeply into the DEIR to see what it says and to kind of think about it carefully and closely in conjunction with a lot of other community members. And so Ralph is here this evening to kind of give us a little overview about what he's found thus far in the study of this environmental impact report. Ralph, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Welcome, everybody. And thank you, Paul, for doing that great presentation. I think I learn something every time I read about this. It can be a bit complicated. Next slide. So following over a year's delay from Rice Gold's initial stated release date for the Idaho-Maryland Mine draft environmental impact report, this long anticipated report has been published. And I'd say true to form, CEO, Vice CEO Ben Mossman paints an overly rosy picture of the draft DEIR as being a highly favorable report, and amazingly even suggests that the final EIR could be out in June. This is all candy to investors, but how accurate is it? Slide, please. In our view, the extensive preparation time has produced a massive document which paints both a dismal picture from the impacts, and it fails on many fronts to adequately address the project. Next slide. Significant and unavoidable impacts were identified in 3 areas. We already have identified major flaws in the studies, and a lot of the data is sketchy. Next slide. Perhaps the most noteworthy is the assessment of these impacts that will have a visceral and immediate impact on the community. As stated in section 4.1-2 on aesthetics, the impacts are for, quote, substantial damage to scenic resources and degrade the existing visual character or quality of public views and its surroundings, conflict with applicable zoning. So that's it, we're done. That's reason enough to deny the project. Okay, seriously, next slide. Another significant and unavoidable impact is identified in traffic. The project will cause impacts at Brunswick Road intersections with Highway 174 at Cedar Ridge, at Sutton Way, and at Idaho-Maryland Road and Centennial Drive. Next slide. The third major area of impacts identified these are just significant and unavoidable impacts I'm talking about, the ones that were identified as key. So the third one is it's also listed as unavoidable, and that's due to the project construction. We have a lot of concern about noise and the accuracy of the noise study. Rice Gold wants us to believe that there's just a minor inconvenience. You may recall that the exploratory drilling conducted by RISE was an extreme ordeal for the residents in the area. But the sound study for that drilling operation showed that the noise was acceptable by the sound standards. The issue is that the noise assessment claimed that the constant sounds were less than the legal threshold, but it was driving the neighbors crazy, causing them to lack sleep. We know of one resident who had to abandon her bedroom to avoid the noise. Next slide. Even without considering that this is only a draft subject to agency and public scrutiny, the document as it stands presents a major obstacle to approval by the Board of Supervisors. As mentioned earlier, by law, the project cannot be approved without the board adopting a special statement of overriding considerations, which can allow them to ignore the CEQA findings of significant impacts. But some plausible justification for overriding the EIR has to be provided. And there's much, much more. Next. Our CEA Foundation researchers and contributors have already identified major issues in the report. We feel it includes a number of conclusions that may be wrong. I'll just touch on a few to give you an idea. Next slide. Perhaps the most critical of these is the impact on groundwater due to the proposed dewatering of the mine and how this will impact wells. I'll give you a little more detail on this one to give you an example of the kinds of things we're talking about. Surprisingly, as far as we can determine so far, almost no flow data was collected at the mine drain points where the water from the entire mine complex drains into Wolf Creek. According to the hydrology reports, only 3 approximations were provided, 2 in 2018 and 1 in 2019. Also included were single observations back in 1994 and in 2007. And not only are their reported values inconsistent, they're completely contradicted by other more precise measurements that were reported in the past that showed outflow rates around 10 times greater. A number of other basic data inputs are either too sparse or of questionable validity. For example, The measurements of variations in water depth at the New Brunswick shaft were used to help establish whether there was a seasonal variation in the amount of groundwater flow into the mine. But upon analysis, it is clear that the data doesn't really support the conclusions. The point is, it's important to realize that these data are critical to establishing the basis for an accurate hydrological model of the groundwater and the rates of flow of that groundwater. Faulty assumptions yield faulty results, and over 300 wells are dependent on getting it right. Next slide. Next slide. Another area, back one, I'm sorry. Somehow we didn't see the error back. There we go. Another area that has a lot of issues is air pollution. We know of at least one aspect of emissions that are not even addressed. More on that later. And greenhouse gas emissions. There seem to be a huge importance by Rise Gold regarding the 10,000 metric tons annual greenhouse gas threshold that is used for CEQA analysis. According to the draft EIR, the amount of emissions will be more along the lines of 9,000 metric tons per year for most of the project life. This is noted as part of the good facts by Rise Gold. As we know, we are in a climate crisis, and this extraordinary amount of greenhouse gas emissions is absolutely unacceptable. But what is interesting is that the analysis fails to include the embedded emissions from cement manufacturing. Including those emissions adds about 4,000 more tons to the total, putting Rise way over the 10,000 ton threshold for all 80 years of planned operations. But in addition to that, the county has goals under the Energy Action Plan, which would be almost completely undone by the energy consumption of this project. And as stated before, the acceptance of an EIR is a necessary but not sufficient condition of approval of the mine. The county can choose to turn it down for many other reasons. Next. So perhaps the most significant red flag is raised with regard to the Centennial cleanup. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, it is a Department of Toxic Substances Control, or DTSC, project on the old 56-acre mine site on Idaho-Maryland Road. Let's go back to the basics. The EIR is required to evaluate all of the environmental impacts of a project. In order for all the impacts of the mine to be determined, the baseline or a current state of the environment needs to be determined. The cleanup is not even included in the project description. In fact, the actual plans on how the cleanup will be done, known as the Remedial Action Plan, or RAP, are not even finalized. And following that, a work plan would be needed before an accurate assessment of the baseline for the mine could even be conjectured. CEA legal analysis had earlier identified that the cleanup project should not be excluded from the mine EIR because the work is far from being completed, that it constitutes an illegal segmentation of the mine EIR, and a baseline for the mine's impacts on the Centennial site has not been established. Next slide. So, so there are numerous other defects in the DEIR, and we keep finding more. We will be extensively commenting on the project. We have a large supporting group of volunteers, a research team. We are collaborating with other groups. We have the contributions from experts, and we are hiring expert consultants to address some areas, key areas of the project. Next slide. And I encourage people who are willing to comment to do so. Read about some aspect of the project. Think about it from different angles. Follow the guidelines and submit your questions or comments. You may be surprised to learn how many times a comment raises an issue that has a huge impact. Tracy will give you more information on that next. So in conclusion, next slide. Remember, this is a draft document. Our effort at this time has been focused on assuring that the final EIR will be accurate and that it accurately informs the county. And although it is early on, from what we can see so far, There are a lot of problems with this draft, and the classification of a number of impacts will likely change. Our prediction, the draft EIR will require more studies and will very likely have to be recirculated in the form of a second DEIR. Oh, I need to mention, we want to thank the huge numbers of you who have donated to our fundraising efforts. Because of your support, we have achieved our goal to raise about 2/3 of our costs to pay for the quality experts and legal support that we need to address this project. And for this period now, we just need to close the gap. So your donations are especially appreciated. And please note, we are a volunteer-run organization. We don't have staff. We have one part-time outreach consultant and a lot of dedicated people supporting our efforts with their time and knowledge. So please consider donating. Thank you all. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you, Ralph. Really appreciate it. Tracy Sheehan next is going to talk about how to write a comment letter for the DEIR. And then after that, we will have a question and answer to the panelists. If you do have some questions you'd like to pose, put them in now so that we can queue them up. Go ahead, Tracy.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Hi, everyone. If I haven't met you yet, I'm Tracy Sheehan, and I'm working with CA on this campaign. So now you've heard what the impacts are and CA's high-level analysis of that. And our job now as a community is to get in quality letters and a high quantity of comment letters by the March 4th deadline. So first of all, you should know that CEA has put in a request for an extension of comments by 30 days, but for tonight's purposes, we're going to stick to that March 4th deadline. Okay, so let's get into it. Next slide. So first of all, before I launch into this, I want to impress on you that all comments are needed. I'm going to get into some of the technical aspects of writing these comment letters. And I want you to keep coming back to the same theme. All comments are needed. So you don't need to be a lawyer or a scientist to write a letter. We are looking for letters that do have deep technical expertise, but also writing a letter that has a layperson's view or response is very welcome and needed. Long or short letters are great and needed. Quality is needed and quantity is definitely needed. So the bottom line is that everyone here on this webinar tonight can write a letter that's critical to this effort. I want you to know that. I also want you to know that there is a planning commission meeting, and those details are yet to be announced by the county, but you can mark your calendar for February 23rd at 9:30 a.m. That's when you'll be able to make public comment. You'll be able to use your voice and comment, but you'll also be able to write letters. You don't have to have your letters in by that February 23rd deadline. March 4th is the deadline for comments. Next slide. Okay, so remember, right now we're all just diving into this DEIR and getting it open and looking at the analysis. So we're working to put together a summary of what we see now, a lot of you that you've heard tonight. So what steps should you take to figure out how to write your letter? First off, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty here. First off, identify your area of concern. There's a chapter on each impact that you will find, and we're going to have a link at the end of this, and we also have a how-to page that's going to guide you through this. But there's a chapter for every impact that you're interested in, and we suggest you read it thoroughly. One place to start, and again, there will be a link for this, is to start by reading the executive summary, and that summary includes a table of impacts and mitigation. And that will give you a good start to give you an understanding of what the impacts and mitigations are, and see what RISE proposes for the mitigations. Looking at that, you can decide what mitigations might be missing. After you've put that together, you can start to write a comment letter. Next slide. Okay, so tips. Here's something that's really important that I didn't realize. This is why you don't need to be a lawyer or a scientist. If you have special expertise or education on the issue you're discussing, note that in your letter. So related job or volunteer experience, a special understanding of local conditions. We all have that. The years you've lived in the area, or if you live close to the mine, all of that gives you special expertise. So make sure you note that in your letter. Second, focus your requests on what you want analyzed, what environmental impacts you want considered or considered in greater detail. Maybe they weren't considered in great detail. Really important, explain the why for each of your conclusions. And I'm going to get into how to do this in a minute. So if you think the proposed mitigations will not mitigate the impacts, explain why. If you think the project impacts in your subject area simply cannot be mitigated to an acceptable level, explain why. So now to be clear, including your opinion on the mine is valid and okay, but it's not a factor for staff in developing the final EIR. So make sure that your personal opinions aren't going to distract from your main message, your clear, concise request that you're going to make of the county. Finally, the DEIR is divided into various categories, about 13 chapters. If you take a look at that list of different chapters, it might spark your thinking and ideas on what to write on. Next slide, sorry. Okay, so the next two slides, I'm going to get a little specific. If you want to take a bit of a challenge on how to phrase your letter, I'm going to give you 2 tips tonight. So the first is to be really clear on what the FEIR must do. So take a look at this slide. I'm concerned how this proposal impacts wells in the area. The FEIR needs to analyze all the wells potentially impacted by the project. That's what it needs to do. The second part of this is the current impact analysis on wells in the DEIR is, and then you fill in what it is there. And we have some suggestions that might apply. So you need to be very clear on what that is. So you're identifying what the FEIR must do. Next slide. Next step is to be really specific on the impact and the mitigation. So this first comment, just scroll through that. That's a fine comment. A lot of people will be giving those comments. However, if you want to take your comment to the next level, you need to get very specific. So scroll through this and look at the bolded points. It's very specific first on the impact, the related to loss of wetland vegetation. It's very specific on the solution and the mitigation that's recommended. The mitigation should include a 100-foot center line of creek. And finally, this person gets bonus points because they have a citation of showing DEIR page 5 through 7. Yay. So that is a great comment. Next slide. Okay, so to just wrap up on that, I missed my slide, sorry, you must not have gotten in there. I want people to know that we are going to have a training on how to write comments. So everyone will be welcome to come. I'm gonna show you later, there's a I Volunteer website that's being launched, and we are going to invite people to come in 4 different, do this virtually as well and dig into this a little bit more. So that's it. That's how to write comment letters. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Okay, so yes, now let's go ahead and, if you could, Stephanie, take down the slideshow for the moment so we can, all the presenters and panelists, can you please put yourself back up on the screen and turn your microphones on? Great. So everyone's been monitoring the questions coming in, and we still had a kind of a little glitch. So I am going to kind of have to go through all the questions and pull out the ones that people asked that we want to present. But I want to start one with Kathleen Woodson. This is related to letter writing, Tracy. So her question is the letter to be sent to Matt Kelly And if the letter is not specific to a particular situation and not highly technical, will the county or the supervisors not take it seriously? I sent a lengthy email to all the supervisors expressing my reasons for opposing the mine, but did not get technical. Is it landing on deaf ears or blind eyes if a person does not, have enough or feel comfortable being technical? Is the EIR data the only thing the county will consider?
Not at all. And I'm hoping Jillian will jump in here too. In my experience, a lot of the comments that come in are not technical. And that's okay. But first of all, my experience is that there is a lot of talent in this community and experience and technical expertise. So I wanted to make the point that it is possible for people to dive in and write these types of comments. But the quantity of comments going into the county is also critical. So the union reported that there were, I think, about 750 scoping comments sent in, and that shows the depth and breadth of concern by the community, and that's really important. Jillian, can I hand that over to you as well?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So it's a great question because sometimes you feel like your comments fall on deaf ears. But quantity is great and quality is great. The one thing I would say about it is what the county is required to respond to are significant environmental issues. So they have to write and respond and give you a written response to every significant environmental issue that you raise. Okay, so you don't need to be an expert, you don't need to be a lawyer, you don't need to be a biologist, but you should consider writing your comments with that in mind. Like, I want to raise a significant environmental issue, right? If we write comments that just say, I don't like the mine, they actually don't have to respond to that kind of a comment because it doesn't relate to SEPA. So I think if you have an area that you're interested in, maybe you're an architect and you know aesthetics, right? Maybe you just have a background that gives you a little information. Maybe you just know the area really well and you can write about the project description and things they may have missed. Try and get as specific as you can, because the more specific you can be and the more examples and evidence and things you might have, like Tracy was referencing, the more the county will be required to take the time to write you a specific response and really do their own analysis to answer your question. So the only other thing I would say is try not to, I know that CEA will be doing a webinar on it too. We want to make sure we don't write all the same comment, because if we do that, then the county will be able to give one programmatic response to like all 500 people who maybe said the same thing. So they'll be looking for ways to do that. So we'll try and, be smart about people tackling different issues.
All right. Kathleen had a follow-up question. She said, should we send the letter to somebody other than the supervisors? So I would like to share my letters with someone to determine if it is significant enough. Ralph, do you want to respond to that? Like, can CEA look at is CEA willing to look at letters and?
Well, definitely send it to the planning department, Matt Kelly. And so then during the review of all the comments by the consultant, those they'll have to all be addressed if they're legitimate questions. So, but also the general public will get an opportunity to see all these comments later on. You could send a copy to CEA. We don't necessarily have the means to analyze all these letters that will be coming in a timely fashion. And I think maybe Christy Hubbard has something to say about that subject, but so we can give more information on that later.
Can I ask? So
Yeah,
this is let me ask a question for Jillian about from a non-expert position. So I'm reading through the DEIR and I see that Brunswick Road is being called a minor arterial. And I think, well, that's not right. it is one of the busiest roads in town, and it's an entryway, and it's always crowded, and all of the intersections are always busy. And the EIR talks about some intersection problems that'll happen on Brunswick, but they call it a minor arterial. So I'm not an expert. Is that a legitimate writing item?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think what you ask yourself this, is the fact that it's minor. First of all, you can add anything into your comment letter. I would say be over-inclusive just in case it is relevant, right? But in answer to your question, ask yourself this, is that fact that it's a minor arterial, is that relevant to their impact analysis, right? Would it change their impact analysis if it was actually considered major? Like maybe it would. Maybe they dismissed it because they considered it minor and they didn't include it in the traffic analysis the way they needed to. So that's kind of the question you would ask yourself. Okay, you categorized it this way, and now you've caused problems with your analysis because that's wrong. So that's how I would frame it.
And in fact, they did, because then in the aesthetic section, they dismiss it because there aren't that many cars on that road.
Exactly. So that's exactly how you'd raise it.
Yeah.
Mike Shea has a question. Says, this is again related to letter writing. If a person has comments in more than one area, is it better to submit them separately or put them all in a single letter?
I'm going to tackle that one. I think it's either or. Whatever you're comfortable with, a single letter is fine. As long as you include everything in there, they will be required to respond to you.
Okay. Minkin Nelson has a question. She asks, isn't the rezoning hearing its own process? And after that, if this is approved and goes through, leaving vast environmental damage, is there a way to hold the county legally liable for their decision based on profits versus actual outcome? Ralph, do you want to try?
Well, I can. So that's kind of a multi-part question, but the zoning change and several other key changes are part of the decision-making process that's all wrapped up in the approval of the project. So, that'll be one of the items, the key items that are listed, and so comments that pertain to that should be addressed in the comments to the EIR. And what was the second question? I think
if the rezoning is approved and goes through and the project happens and there's vast environmental damage, is there a way to hold the county legally liable for their decision based on profits versus actual outcome?
Okay, this is kind of a tough one. It gets a little bit complicated. First of all, in terms of the project approval process, they'll take all the comments from the draft EIR, and then they'll try to address them all in a final EIR, and then that final EIR will be published. So then there'll be hearings, and we'll have our chance to comment at those hearings. And in the end, before they can approve the project, they have to certify that the EIR is adequate. So if there's some deficiency in the EIR, then the mechanism that's left available to the general public, and Jillian can maybe refine my answer to this, is a legal lawsuit, a challenge to the findings. And so that would be the primary way that you could address whether they've been adequate or not. But suppose they went ahead and approved it, and then subsequently there's some sort of liability. Generally, the liability falls on the applicant, but the county is the decision maker, so they would maybe be a co-plaintiff in the charge. But I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know. That's kind of a complicated question. Depends maybe upon the nature of the actual complaint.
Yeah, and I can add to that if you want, Ralph.
Sure.
So what folks should just keep in mind, we won't get into the weeds on kind of all the land use approvals, but there are about 7 different local permits that this project's going to need in addition to CEQA. So the county needs to approve CEQA, and once that's certified, oftentimes at the same meeting, they will do whatever land use approvals they need of the project. And so at that meeting, In addition to this public meeting they're having in February, at that meeting, they're going to have hearings. Those are the ones we're going to want, folks to attend and speak against the project itself. So they're two different kind of processes. Oftentimes they're handled at the same meeting or one meeting right after the other. And we'll keep everybody informed, I assume, of what all those hearings are coming up and where you can speak. But in answer to the question on, how you challenge it, any one of those actions can be challenged. There's an appeal process for some of them. I don't want to get in the weeds, but there's an appeal process at the Board of Supervisors for some of them. And you have to go through the local process. And then once that's done, you can actually file a lawsuit against the county for approving the project. So it wouldn't be something that happens later with some environmental damage. Like Ralph said, at that point, it's really on kind of the applicant. But initially, when the county does approve, if the county did approve the project, any one of those approvals could be challenged in court.
Good. Carol McMillan has a question. She says, in addition to the many environmental concerns, the finances of the company seem to be really important, but are they not a factor in this stage in the DEIR?
This is a question that's been brought up a lot. So we're really focusing right now on the draft DEIR. The county has commissioned an economic study that's supposed to help look at the economic impacts of the project. And then in terms of financial structure of the applicant company, there aren't any real criteria at this stage that would preclude them from going forward with their application as long as they submit things that are required of them. But where that really comes into play is later on down the road. If they get further down the road, they may be required, I imagine they should and would be required to submit some significant bonds and sureties to guarantee anything that they're going to be doing on some of these mitigations to protect the community, and also funding for a reclamation plan when they're all done, and reclamation or mitigation means for protecting well owners and all those issues as well. So at that point in time, they would have to have substantial resources. But one could imagine that they might be able to find substantial resources there if they have a convincing argument that they're going to actually be able to mine this gold and get it out of the ground, and eventually, after a long battle, end up being able to actually operate as a gold mine. I think that covers it. Anybody else want to add in?
Well, Ralph, thanks. I mean, we know what their financial condition is because they have to file it with the SEC, and we know they don't have any money. We know that they have debts they have to pay because they've been borrowing money up to this point to fund this process. We also know that the improvements required by the project are somewhere between $100 and $200 million. So, I mean, they have a huge hurdle to bring this project to life. And I've heard a lot of kind of backrooms, smoke-filled kind of discussions about really what the intent is. And some people say, well, they're just going to get the approval and then sell the approval to somebody who has deep pockets. But we really don't know. But what we do know is it will take $100+ million to launch this project.
So Paul, Itara asks, so after I think a kind of a clarification of some sort, that after the EIR is submitted, what happens before the Board of Supervisor votes? What's that process in between?
I would defer to Jillian on that. I think first of all, the Planning Commission makes the decision. And then I assume it would go to the Board of Supervisors for concurrence. And then once that were to occur, then they go back to the list of approvals they would need for rezoning and variances and those kinds of things. They could all be at one meeting. They could be at separate meetings. I've seen it go all different ways. Jillian?
No, you're right. So basically they do the draft EIR, they prepare the response to comments document, they get a final EIR ready. The planning commission will vote to certify that EIR, and it's possible at that meeting that they would also vote to approve several of the approvals that are within just the planning commission's purview. Some of them are within the board of supervisors, some of them the planning commission. So the planning commission at that meeting could do CEQA first, because you got to have CEQA done and certified in order to approve anything. But then in the very next action at the same meeting, they could approve like the use permit and some of the other local approvals they need. And then it's appealable to the board of supervisors. There are, I don't want to get too confusing, but there are some of the local approvals that go directly to the board of supervisors for approval. So first, so like the rezoning approval, that has to get a recommendation from the planning commission that then goes to the board of supervisors. So we can kind of map this out as we get closer to it. But I think the bottom line takeaway for this community is there's going to be a lot of public hearings where you can come and speak and have your voices heard, both at the planning commission and at the board of supervisors. So kind of keep your eyes open for those dates to be able to get involved.
And I might add, we're going to really try to stay on top of this and post to the website and to our monthly webinars where everything is in the process and how you can participate, how you can help, where we need help. And so, stay tuned.
Yeah.
All right, great. Hey, Lori Oberhatzer, you're on. I can see you on our panel, and you made a comment offline that you think it's really important that we need to assure people that they'll have a chance to speak on just the project after the EIR portion of the hearings. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, or shall we?
Yeah, I just would like to remind everybody that there's two parts to this process. There's the EIR, which just takes so much time and energy, but then right after the EIR hearing is done, usually in Nevada County, that they hold the hearing immediately, like 2 seconds later, on the actual project. And the reality is that the planning commissioners are exhausted by that time, and they have a tendency to not even really speak much about the actual project. And so I think the CEA is probably going to work. We're going to talk to the county planner and see if we can have the hearing on the EIR one day and the hearing on the actual project approval another day, so that everybody can just sort of change gears and have a different kind of conversation when they're talking about the actual project approval, because there are a million reasons that this project could be denied that have nothing to do with the EIR, like public opposition, for example. And so we'll work with everybody on how to make a second set of comments that are just on, denial or approval of the project.
Sort of related to letters, back to letters. What are some good things to look for in the DEIR for comment letters? So let's say I like to take a read. It's a long document. How do I focus, and how do I kind of look for things to comment on?
Is that for me?
Can be for anybody. Jillian, you want to take a?
Sure. Oh, all right. Did someone else want to?
Ralph, anybody? Yeah. Just like how do I start? I'm just trying to figure out how this process is going to work.
So
how can I be helpful?
I can make a couple of comments, and other people probably have great ideas, but of course start with the introduction document and the executive summary, because that gives you a broad picture. And then there's a project description it's probably about a 50-page read, and that gives you a lot more information about the project. But then especially if you have a particular interest or a particular area of concern, then that's an area you should probably look at. And if you have some more knowledge in a particular area, then that would be the area that you'd probably be able to do the most meaningful comments. But really, you can just look at just about anything, and if you think about it, sometimes you can just come up with something that isn't really discussed. somebody the other day said, well, what about the fencing? They're going to put fencing around this project. Does it go all the way around or just part way around? And how's that going to affect the animals? You know, how's that going to affect migration? What's it going to look like? Is there a picture of it? Why isn't there a picture? You know, so I mean, just think about things, and that's a way to get started. And other suggestions are welcome.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Ralph. What you're interested in is what you're going to be able to focus on. The only point I would make that I think it sometimes gets lost because it's this crazy 1,000-page document that makes people's head hurt. It's complicated. And believe it or not, this document is supposed to be written for you, the public. That's what it's designed to give the public information. So, which is nuts, right? So if there's something you're reading and it doesn't make sense to you, comment on it. You know, if it doesn't make sense, if the mitigation measure doesn't look like that's going to work, or they can't afford the mitigation measure, how is that enforceable? Or who's going to make sure that happens? All those things that you would ordinarily think about in your common sense as a member of the community are really relevant. So if something doesn't make sense to you, it's probably because it doesn't make sense, and it's a good comment to make.
Somewhere in someone's presentation, I think Ralph's, you mentioned that there's certain comments that could force the county to have to recirculate the DEIR. What does that mean exactly?
Well, it's not the comments itself, but identification of impacts that they haven't really talked about, if there's an impact they've assessed, but because they haven't really assessed it accurately, or maybe there's information that's missing or you feel is incorrect, they might end up changing the impact from, say, less than significant to significant, or if there's a mitigation that won't work. That I think that might even have an impact. But basically, if they have to go and publish more studies and do more work to identify impacts that weren't included in the draft EIR, I think that can cause it to be recirculated. That's just my general understanding of it. I don't really know exactly how they draw that line.
Yeah,
I rely upon our legal people to figure that part out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. I'm noticing we're at about 7:13 right now, and there's been an overwhelming number of questions. I've kind of like lost track. So here's what we're going to do. I want to turn it over to Tracy again. If Tracy, are you still able to present? I know she's having some connectivity problems. Oh, there you are. I'm going to suggest that you kind of do your closing thing about how other actions we can take, and then we'll open it up to just open forum conversation. So for all of you who did not get your questions answered during this part, go ahead and raise your hand if you still want to ask them, and we'll acknowledge you, and we can just we'll make that part of the public open discussion. Is that okay with everyone? Does that sound right? Okay, good. Go ahead, Tracy.
Cue up the slide. If I crash, somebody will jump in and explain it. It will all be so obvious once that slide is up.
Okay,
so
Stephanie, is Stephanie still on?
Yes, she is.
Okay.
So
Stephanie,
I am pleased to announce that we have a new website, a volunteer website called I Volunteer with MineWatch. And that is going to be the portal to help everyone here volunteer in a seamless way. And there's much to do. I can't believe I'm talking about only a month. So some of these activities are going to go way past that time. So how can you volunteer? Okay, next.
Are you still on?
I think we lost Tracy.
I think she looks frozen.
Yeah, okay. Tracy, you might want to try turning she's probably gonna have to log back on. So
Well, can we go to next screen?
This is Christy.
yeah, go ahead, Christy.
Christy.
Can you go over this while Tracy is unfreezing
I
herself?
think I can try to sub for her a little bit. I'll cover what's on this slide and she'll bring in the color when she gets back online.
Great.
So there are a ton of things that we can do. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. There are a ton of things that we can do. A big push, and this is really for everyone, everybody who wants to write comments for the DEIR and everywhere beyond. One of our big pushes is to get even more signatures on the petition. And there's just a ton of ways that you can help us do that. You can just make your support visible with a yard sign or a pin, a t-shirt or a bumper sticker. All of this is on mine. All of these things are links on minewatchnc.org. So all you have to do is click there and you can figure out how to get there. Another huge thing that we're asking folks to do is share MineWatch content on social media. As a matter of fact, I've got a slide I'll hop to in a second. But basically, we've got a lot of great shareable content up there, and we are really encouraging people to get out there, share with groups, share with friends, talk with groups, whatever you need to do. You know, we are very much COVID impaired here, and digital is one of our best ways to get the word out. It's been pretty amazing recently. As a matter of fact, we've seen a huge uptick in Facebook discussions and next door discussions. So please help, chip in, lend your knowledge, inspire the conversation. Some other really great ways to help: ask your neighbors to sign the petition by staffing, right? We've got table setups. We've also got a canvassing, some days for canvassing, knocking on doors. And that's actually in that MineWatch I Volunteer area. You can sign up for that. You can ask local businesses to sign a letter, or you can create your own activity or event. And we've got people doing that right now. Tracy, are you back on yet? Did you want to talk about that? I'm just going to.
I don't think she is. I think she's.
Okay.
She's basically saying she's going to have to, her battery's dead or something has gone wrong. So thanks very much, Christy. Yeah, I think that's good. So yes.
Okay, I have a few more slides.
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, cool. All right, yeah. So some other activities. Actually, if you could back up, Stephanie, I wanted to just say one more thing then about the inspiration of other people starting their own events. We've got some amazing things going on. Tara O'Connell is driving a theater event and it's going to be on the 20th, and this will be up in our events calendar by tomorrow, so you can see that. We've got a lady who wrote in and said, I'm going to have a comment writing party. We've had people saying, how do I get a kit so I can go knock on my neighbors' doors? So if you want to drive your own events, please just do it. Don't let us be in your way. If you want to share with us, if you want us to help you, advertise that or even get people signed up, let us know. We'll add it to our events calendar. We'll add it to our iVolunteer calendar so that people can know more about it. And now, Stephanie, if you would go to the next slide, that would be awesome. I promised that I was going to say a little bit more about the shareable content on social media. We have prepared some new content. A lot of what we've been doing on social media has been sharing op-eds and opinions that have gone out and the articles that have been written. But now that we're in this phase of the campaign, sometimes you just need a quick little something that says, did you know that this thing is going on? And that's what we've prepared a bunch of these. And you'll be seeing, we've got some of them out there already. We've got more coming. If you go to the iVolunteer site, we'll actually give you the little list of how you can help and where you can go look to find these things and share these things. You can share what we've created. You can create your own. There are no rules. Just get out there and talk. Stephanie, go ahead to the next slide. All right. Here's another one. We've been talking a lot about writing comments or opinions. And in fact, we have a new how-to guide, and you're going to get that link as part of your follow-up materials to this. It really takes you through it. I just realized that I didn't even have my screen on. Sorry about that. Just a talking head. Anyway, so we do have a how-to guide that is already online at MineWatch, and you can find it right on our homepage. But we'll also follow up with that as we follow up and say thank you for attending this event tonight. So we definitely, this whole evening has been about writing comments, but here's another idea. And that is, how about once you've written some of that information, why don't you think about writing reformatting it and just submitting it to the newspaper as an opinion piece too? That's always an option. And one of the things we would love, and this is a very special ask, we actually have a sign up on our MineWatch I Volunteer page. If you're going to write comments, would you please just go to our I Volunteer and tell us that you're going to do that? We've got a little sign up page. And with that, that's how we know you're doing that. And then we can follow up with you directly about that training session. And we even have an email that we want people to send to, like if you write comments, you could copy us. And if that appeals to you, that information will be there. So if you sign up on the volunteer website, then we can send you all that information. Stephanie, next slide.
All right. So thank you so much, Christy, for stepping in. And okay, so what we want to do now is open it up to kind of open forum. And the way we're going to do that is there's a lot of us still on the call. If you would like to make a comment or ask a question to the panelists or just a question to all of us, go ahead and use the raise hand icon. Now, Mary, Linda, and Marian, your hands are raised at the moment, but they've been up for a long time. So I'm gonna, just before everybody starts raising their hand, I'm gonna lower all attendants' hands. I'm gonna kind of erase all the hands up. And if you want to speak, I'll know that you're still interested, okay? So here we go, I'm gonna lower everybody's hands. So now, can everyone please raise their hand again? Thanks. All right, so I'm just going to take it in the order that I see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to acknowledge your name and I'm going to unmute you or allow you to talk. You may need to unmute yourself if you have yourself muted, but I'm going to start with Marian Blair. Go ahead, Marian, you're on.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Jillian answered one earlier, but I have another one sort of on the heels of that. Can you question their methodology in sampling? I really am questioning how they were sampling for red-legged frogs and for foothill yellow-legged frogs. Is it acceptable to question that?
This is Jillian. Yes, absolutely. Especially if you have a background in the area. If they made some assessment there wasn't going to be an impact, and you think that the analysis they used led them to miss some impacts, but you have some background to explain, what type of protocols and things they should have been using,
right,
by all means.
Okay, thank you.
Studies, anything you have to that effect from the Fish and Wildlife Service, anything you have to share would be great.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, Martha Turner, go ahead.
She's muted.
Martha, you're still muted. You may need to unmute yourself.
There we go. Sorry. Thank you. How many attendees are there in this meeting today? We have no idea from sitting out here in the audience.
There was about 185.
Great. Oh, that's great. Okay, second question is that I've heard rumor about there being some sort of a weekly protest at the corner of Brunswick and Sutton. Is it ITARA who is organizing that? And how will we know what time and how can we participate? Or will there be signs that we should bring, our yellow and black signs?
Christy?
Yes, please bring those signs. As a matter of fact, if you go to that new I Volunteer link that we showed earlier, we actually have signups for ITARA's event on Saturdays. So please do.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much, Martha.
Thank
you. So Steve Mendoza, go ahead.
Hi. First of all, thanks for all the great information. It's been really valuable. a lot of others probably feel the same way. My question is fairly simple. I signed the petition. I submitted some comments with that. I saw a slide saying, submit comments on the website, but the letter itself to the Planning Commission, what form should that take? Should it be through the mail? Can we submit those electronically, via email, all the above? Logistically, what's the best way to write a letter?
I can start on the answer. Maybe other people have better answers, but for sure, if you send it by email to Matt Kelly, the planning department, then it will be put into the record if you indicate that there's a comment that's going to go towards the DEIR. You can also send these things to other people. There's no guarantee that they'll read them. I mean, you imagine that if you're a planning commissioner and you get a couple hundred emails on a topic, you're probably going to wait until you can review them in the context of the actual agenda item. But some people will read them, so there's no harm there. It's just in terms of what the expectations would be. Yes, Jillian.
I was just going to say as well, if you go to the county's website where you can find the draft DIR, there's something called the Notice of Availability. And if you click on that, it tells you exactly how to submit a comment letter. So it can either be by mail, it can be by email. Either of those work well. And I actually think they have a specific email address to receive comments. So I would make sure to go. I think it's Idaho. There isn't a chat button to put it in. That is idaho.mmeir@co-nevada. I don't want to, it's probably hard for people to write down now, but go to the Notice of Availability and you'll see the specific directions on the website.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Steve. All right, James Bear, you're on.
Hi, thanks for giving me the opportunity to share this evening. I had an interesting experience today. Some of you have probably had. I went to the Planning Commission meeting, of course, via Zoom. And I did so to kind of see who these people were. And I did get a good sense of the commission. My previous contact had been with planning department staff. And I learned from them that the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors are in two different floors, and sometimes they talk. So I thought, well, if I'm going to write letters, I'm going to write them to both of those organizations. But the bottom line from today's experience was that the staff was completely behind the decision-making process, and the commissioners seemed to be sort of just distant observers. And in the end, with regard to a building project that needed a lot of, I guess, tolerance in its building, the planning commissioner just read the staff's conclusions word for word and then said, okay, now everybody vote on this. And so every commissioner voted on it. Well, I've been to, I don't know, dozens of DEIR and CEQA proceedings, and it seems like staff is the most important element. So I guess I have a question, which is, are we reaching the staff as much as we need to influence what they do tell the planning commissioners? And I guess also, is it possible, Jillian might have a handle on this, is it possible to go try to meet with the staff? One person might be important, would be Brian Foss and Matt Kelly. It'd be really interesting to talk to them. I've emailed with Kelly and he's pretty good, but shouldn't they be a target?
You want to answer that first, Ralph?
Well, I can make a brief comment, and I think other people might be able to add to it. I mean, planning commissioners are serving at the discretion of the supervisors and appointed by them. And they have various levels of skill and maybe various levels of engagement. It's a quasi judicial body, and so it's supposed to have a certain amount of independence, but they do tend to rely heavily on staff, and a lot of that's necessary. But in an ideal world, every planning commissioner will be very well versed in all aspects of the project, and be able to really grasp all the ins and outs and make the decisions pretty well informed. And I was a planning commissioner for a while, and I realized it's an awful lot of work, a lot of reading, a lot of effort, and so they can be applauded for doing this work. But of course, it would be nice sometimes if they would be more engaged. So we can encourage them to be engaged by encouraging them to be engaged and pointing out how important it is and commenting.
I see Jillian has a big smile. I do.
Yeah.
Too. Let's hope.
I'm only smiling because I kind of shared your frustration, both of you, where you wish the planning commissioners really would dig their teeth into what it is they're approving more than they do. And so I agree with you that a lot of times they just look at staff and they count on staff to do the research. And if staff recommends it, then they're not going to want to speak out against staff unless they have good reason. So I agree with you that it's important to work with staff as much as you can. I think that's what Lori was talking about, working with staff to try and get two separate meetings where the steep was handled in one and the planning commission project approval is in another. So I think there's definitely some things we can try and talk to them about. And I know Ralph already has done a lot of those talkings. So, but yes, in the end, you got to present to the planning commission at those hearings. But Lori, do you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I think over the last year that we've been working on this or longer, we've had a lot. The CEA has had a lot of contact with staff, and I've been a planning commissioner too, and I know sometimes it seems like the planning commissions just follow staff, but on a big issue like this, I'm pretty confident that they'll be pretty up to speed on it, and it'll be impossible for them not to be, because there's going to be huge staff reports and person after person after person standing up and speaking, and they'll be pretty educated on this, I think, by the time they're ready to take their vote. And I think they're human. I think they're going to be swayed by community input.
If I could weigh in, I completely concur. I mean, I've sat on planning commissions, and I would say out of 5, maybe half actually read all the documents the way they should have been read. And so all the commissioners rely on staff to kind of get to the nuts of things. I found attending public hearings recently with the planning commission that the general plan is often not respected the way it should be and referred to the way it should be. And when I read the EIR, I don't see a lot of reference to the general plan, the county general plan, except where it benefits Rise Gold. To me, that's part of what we need to do. We need to hold their feet to the fire and say we're citizens here, and we believe this needs further thought and further study, and force them to do the work, both staff and commissioners and board of supervisors.
I want to just make everyone aware that we are past 7:30. And we said we would go until 7:30. I also recognize that there are still people who want to ask or answer or make comments. And so what I'd like to do is just take this opportunity to thank everyone who came tonight. And I hope that everyone got some questions answered, understands how they can kind of proceed in terms of thinking about responding, making public comment on the DEIR. And also just to remind everyone that we are going to have a specific meeting, or CEA is going to have a specific meeting about writing letters, and that it will be happening sometime before the 23rd of February, just because that will be the time when people can make comments to the Planning Commission. And then so keep an eye out for when that is. We'll obviously announce it, and we hope to see everybody there. So with that, I would, if everyone's okay, can we, is people feeling okay about answering a few questions that we have? You okay with that?
Sure.
Can people
Play
hang on
10
for
minutes.
another
You
5
go.
minutes?
Another 5 minutes?
Yeah. Okay, so let's go through them very quickly. So Tess and Tina, go ahead and ask your question. You are on, and you're muted at the moment, by the way. There you go.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, was two things, but one thing was, are we doing anything about the endangered flannel bush that could be potentially affected in that area? Is there any progress or looking into that with environmental lawyers?
Yeah, I can answer that one. Yes, we're paying close attention to that, and we're actually working closely with the California Native Plant Society, and people there are looking at that as well. There's some issues regarding the genetic sequencing of this plant, so we're hoping that can get resolved, but it's definitely a very important issue, and we also welcome other people who have expertise in this subject to go ahead and comment on it, because we're very concerned that that population is a small population, and it's right next to where they're doing the DTSC cleanup, and then it's right next to where they'll be dumping mine tailings for 5 years. And so it is definitely a very important issue. Thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you. And one more thing. So I'm actually connected to an investor who owns a gold mine, and he's actually interested in investing in this gold mine. And what's really special about what he does is he actually keeps the gold in the ground. And he's, a potential, investor. And maybe if it's about money and we could bring in someone that would be willing to invest in the land and create jobs in the community, but also keep the gold in the ground, is that something that we could bring forth? And he is willing to meet with people. And he told me that it's not actually that Rise Gold is actually just a front, that behind Rise Gold, it's actually Yamano that are actually doing the money behind this project. And the reason that they're hiding behind Rise Gold is because they don't want, if their permit gets denied, they don't want the shame of it. So if we could do like some sort of PR where we could shame Yamano and tell them that they're going to be affecting the small community, affecting the land, and also it could also affect the hospital. I believe some of the mining could affect the hospital with the digging and the mining, and if we could just like use that angle, to shame Yamano in a sort of PR press, and that he said that would be really helpful because they're the money behind this and they're behind Rise Gold. I don't know if you guys knew that, or so I just wanted to bring that to the table as well.
Yeah, yes, we're aware of that to a point. It's hard to draw conclusions about what people's motivations or reactions would be with respect to shame. I mean, gold mining, I don't know, in a way it's kind of a shameful industry, but the idea of investing in the mine, it would be great if an investor wants to buy up enough shares to take a controlling interest and then shut the whole thing down. We thought about doing that back in 2008, the last time around, but we didn't really have the resources, but maybe it's possible. So we're willing to entertain ideas like that. Thank you for bringing that forward.
I think what this woman referred to, there was an article in the New York Times about a different model of mining. So basically most gold is just harvested for as an asset that gets tucked away in a vault somewhere, and there is an alternative that and I'm not going to go any further than this, that of actually investing in companies that leave gold in the ground but that use them as an asset, but you don't need to be dug up. It was a very interesting article. I'll just sort of tell people know that there's an article out there. It was an interesting read. That said, enough. Okay. Tara, go ahead. Your last one, and then we're going to call it a night. And you're on mute.
Okay, my question, I wanted to answer about it's not really a protest on Sutton and Brunswick. First of all, I guess you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So Sutton and Brunswick we're holding signs that say public comment is now. And that's 4 o'clock on Tuesdays. So but the vision of it was for you to be in different parts of the city. So it's not necessarily Brunswick and Sutton. I mean, if you could hang out on Greenhorn, that would be fabulous, because there's a lot of residents there and there are a lot of people going by on Brunswick. So this would be an important place to advertise the fact that we have public comment now. But my question is about, okay, page 1 of the draft environmental impact report says that when the wells are destroyed by the mining, that NID will just take care of this. Is that a done deal? I mean, is that already, you know, a contract that NID is going to take care of these wells? Is that our understanding? So we could comment on that and say that.
Yes.
So that's an area on one that is not, you know, this is a big issue. How would NID, you know, be obligated to do this, and how would they actually do it? So maybe that's one of the questions that needs to be addressed, because that's obviously an important factor, the wells, you know, going dry and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
I would say absolutely. And it's one of the things also that we were talking about earlier. I think Paul mentioned it, that mitigation measures have to be achievable and enforceable. And if we don't know if NID will be granting those water connections, it's not enforceable. If the county can't grant it, it can't be a mitigation measure because the county can't control it. So great. It's a great point. It's a great comment.
All right, so thank you to all the people that asked questions, both written and live. And thank you so much to the panelists. Really appreciate everyone's contributions. And as I said, our CEA will be doing another meeting sometime in the month of February to help us write our letters. And with that, I think we will say good night. Unless there's anything that needs to be said before we go by anyone.
I just want to thank everyone for attending. We really appreciate it. Tracy, you. And thank everybody on the panel here for all the hard work. We're really a lucky community to have so many supporters, so many engaged people, and so many knowledgeable people helping us. So thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Atara, for doing your activities out there. That's really appreciated. We have a number of independent people who are doing little activities on their own, and that's great. It just kind of keeps growing. So thank you very much. All right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Cool.
So good night, everybody. Till the next time. Bye.
Good night. Bye.